dear Father Simon and the equatorial trio of triumvirate. You can have a trio of triumvirate, I don't think, Mark.
That'd be 9, wouldn't it?
Pardon?
That'd be 9, wouldn't it?
A trio of triumvirate, I suppose it probably would be, and that wouldn't. That's not very astute of you. Mental arithmetic, unbelievable.
Hey, you gotta get up early to catch me out.
The incident I'm about to describe took place in the early 70s. It's a very early 70s confession, actually, this whole thing. During the wedding of my cousin from my father's side, and where relatives from both sides of the family, myself and my co-confessor, cousin Stephen, were present in large numbers. The celebrations followed the usual honoured sequence, and after the speeches came the cutting of the multi-tiered cake. It is from this innocent and much traditionally cherished act that events were to take a turn for the worse. The table holding the cake was of the classic layout of the time, it was set with what can only be described as a capital U with straight sides. Stephen and I were sat dangling our legs back and forth on a pair of chairs at the extreme end of one of the U legs, and people were happily chit-chatting away whilst munching on the sliced up top 2 tiers of cake. At this point, the remaining layer of cake caught my eye, or rather the very desirable-looking pink icing roses adorning each corner. It suddenly occurred to Stephen and I that the cake layer ought to be relieved of these attractive adornments to allow us to eat them, because we were still hungry. Naturally, this was a self-awarded gift for our excellent behaviour throughout the proceedings thus far. But how to acquire them unnoticed? Well, it didn't take us long to work out that the only way to get to them unseen was to go under the tables, to follow the natural line of the wedding tables in a sort of sugar rose guided mischievous child kind of way. So the two of us slowly submerged ourselves under the long tablecloths, carefully picked our way past, under and through the maze of legs, handbags and other paraphernalia, eyes to the floor. Arriving at the 90-degree corner, we deftly manoeuvred ourselves around this obstacle, becoming by now quite experienced in the ways of sub-table traversing, and before long we were at the point where we were sure we were directly underneath the cake and the prize. Reaching up and around the table and its long cloth, and using the powers of feel and memory...
The powers of feel. Brilliant.
They're a band.
Yeah.
Our fingers traced the profile of the remaining cake layer along its sides, sliding along the silky posh ribbon and up and along the crisp, piped ice ledge. And then we recognised the unmistakable feel of the sugar icing roses on the corner. No sooner had we touched them than we had deftly removed them, bringing our hands back under the table to admire our booty. Yes, Simon, perfect handwork. Pink sugar icing roses lay almost glowing in our trembling palms. With a knowing look at each other, we carefully and skillfully repeated the operation, thereby liberating the remaining sugar roses from the safety of their perches on the other corners of the cake. After stuffing our fat faces, we retraced our route and returned safely to our seats. Looking back across the room, I admit the cake now looked a little bit sorry for itself, shorn of its beautiful and tasty decorative morsels. We were about to congratulate ourselves on getting away with this perfect cakey heist, when our joy was disturbed by an ear-splitting and eye-watering screech from the bride's mother, loudly shouting about, "That was being saved for the christening!" It was Terry Jones. A little bit of Terry Jones there, yeah. Anyway, the wailing then turned into demands to know who was responsible, issued with much gnashing of teeth, spitting of feathers, and searing glares at anyone within visual range. Almost instantly, the hysterical mother of the bride spotted our rose-coloured mouths, bit of a giveaway, and started screaming in our direction. We stood up in a shower of icing sugar, crumbs, guilty as charged. Our respective mothers rushed to the scene to try and quell the wailing and shrieking woman, but there was no subduing her. My mother did offer to have the cake re-iced with new roses, such as it would be returned to its former multi-petalled glory in time for the christening. But no, this was rejected by a lava flow of vitriol and statements to the effect of what a terrible upbringing we'd been given, what ruinous delinquents we were, how the day had been ruined, and how the future christening of some poor child was now devastated, and we'd all go to hell. You get
harsh.
A little bit emotional
harsh.
at weddings. And then somehow, before our very eyes, the whole kerfuffle increased in numbers, with family members from each side becoming involved. The disturbance somehow managed to move through the front doors and spill into the car park directly outside. And it was here that the men got involved, pushing and shoving and general finger-pointing. Stephen and I were thinking things couldn't get worse when, from nowhere, a clenched fist from the relative of the bride caught my Uncle Terry a cracking blow on the head. The next thing we know, there was a blur of 1970s shades of brown and orange suits, moustaches, thick solid shoes and heavily coiffured hair, with arms and legs flailing in their flared trousers at each other quite dramatically. All it needed was the arrival of the Sweeney to make things absolutely perfect. Oh, you're nicked. Cover 'em up, love. Eventually, the energy in the situation subsided. Both sides withdrew. They always said that.
Yeah, they did.
To lick their wounds and examine torn suit jackets. It's fair to say the wedding reception from here on in was never quite the same. The convivial and jolly atmosphere replaced by a sort of Berlin Wall-like situation, slightly overstated again, until all the guests departed with a very clear separation of the once homogeneous family into two distinct elements, those that had sugar roses and those that did not have sugar roses. So in summary, I prostrate myself, different thing altogether, at the mercy of the righteous collective, and ask forgiveness not for stealing the sugar roses, because after all, that's what kids do, but for the creation of a family Cold War of the roses that would last for quite some time, denying us the need to occasion Christmas visits and the sending of Christmas cards for many, many years. And it all started in a car park after the nicking of a few bits of sugar ornament. Anyway, that's the tale from Mark. What do you make of that? Little bit of a sitcom, I think, going on there, Sister Bobby.
Phew. Mark and cousin Stephen, it's... well, you were young. Actually, how old? Were we talking about under 10 or something? Had you been kind of grown-ups, then I wouldn't have forgiven you. But you're right, it is what kids do. And kids at weddings can get very, very bored, so they amuse themselves in all sorts of ways.
It's the most boring thing in the world.
If you're a kid.
Wedding's boring.
And also, the thing is, you took the roses off, and you know it was a little bit naughty, but of course, that's what happens, and you weren't interested in the cake, really, or the pieces of cake. What I'm going to say is, because you were young, you're forgiven. And also, you're not responsible for the kind of fisticuffs afterwards. That is the adults who actually should have basically just been a little bit quieter and a little bit more understanding. It sounds
though they were all waiting for an excuse.
Yeah, I think so. And also, your mum offered a way of fixing it. So that's, as far as I'm concerned, Mark and cousin Stephen, you are forgiven. It's
I
the
think
grown-ups' fault.
these families, maybe Mark just wasn't aware of it, but there was a lot of family, inter-family tension, and all it needed was a spark. You know, like the assassination of the Duke in Sarajevo, it just needed a spark.
Wow.
To fire the war, and that's what they got. And it was the eating of a little bit of
a
historical reference.
Well done.
You got that? No, absolutely.
Novice Nigel.
Lob that in. As they did. I think it sounds like an average Williams wedding.
Yes.
The Northwest and what have you. But initially, Mark and Stephen, they were naughty boys. They went there, they nicked the roses, they knew what they were doing. And I thought, well, that's it. I'm not going to forgive you. And then, but the reaction of the mother of the bride was, it probably all went Peaky Blinders, didn't it? I mean, absolutely absurd. And as you say, there must have been a festering cauldron of uncertainty about this.
I like that, a festering cauldron of uncertainty.
And then someone lit the bonfire underneath it. And just absurd that it went off. It wasn't really the lad's fault eventually. And that certainly wasn't a dull wedding by the end of it. So Mark and Stephen, absolutely, completely forgiven on this occasion.
What do you make of that, Matt?
Well, it's clearly different times, isn't it? It feels like far fewer weddings these days degenerate into fights. It felt like loads more did back in the old 70s. Days. Back in the old days. Yes. But not so much these days. I mean, it felt like the perfect crime as well. You know, they got away with it. Or would have done if the bride's mother hadn't noticed and got the caster sugar all over them. So I'm going to say forgiven, because can they really be blamed for that? Would any of us have done different? Don't think so. So I'm going to forgive.